human passions or prejudices. If a lawyer makes such a comment, you should disregard that comment. If you become conscious of any passion or prejudice as you consider the evidence and engage in your deliberations, you must put these feelings aside and not permit them to influence your thinking. With that, we'll turn to the closing arguments. As is the custom, we'll hear first from the defense. Attorney Tipton.
What could happen to a loving father and a loving husband? Would make you lie or please before you. Search for the unspeakable on the internet. Exposed body of the woman that you adore. Governments suggests it was an affair. There's no proof of that. There's no proof that Brian Walsh knew anything about an affair between the woman he loved and William Penn. Money? Second reason that the government suggests. Family money? Money that the family had worked together for years and continued to talk about in text messages and the sales of property, trying to protect the assets for the benefit of the whole family and the future of their 3 children. A motive? There's no motive. Refusal to consider prison for a terrible mistake he made. The case that began in 2018. There's no proof of that he was afraid to go to prison. Who wants to go to prison? But prison was always on the table. And it was just something that he had to face up to and something that he did. So, what would cause a loving husband and a loving father to do the things that you heard about in this case? Could it be something that was sudden, something that was unexpected, something that was unbelievable, something that only a medical examiner would understand, have knowledge of, but not a man like Brian Walsh? Something that is terrifying, something that defies logic when it happens. How do we know that Mr. Walsh was a loving father and a loving husband? We know from much of the testimony of Jim Motlow. We know from simple testimony from Julie Basler from KinderCare. When asked questions about her experience with Mr. Walsh and the children, that he would show up and he'd be interested and he'd be friendly, and he was always interested in the progress of his children. And how do we know he was a good father? Because Anna Walsh trusted him with their 3 children, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, for all those times she was up in Washington, D.C. The unthinkable happens. It happens in a variety of ways. And the Commonwealth must prove to you beyond a reasonable doubt that a homicide occurred, that a killing occurred, Nothing proves that beyond a reasonable doubt on the facts and circumstances and the evidence given to you. There's evidence that he lied to the police. There's evidence that he searched the internet. There's evidence that he disposed of a body. But there is no proof in all of the evidence that you have heard and been presented that he ever once thought about harming the woman he loved. That he ever thought about harming the woman he loved. That he ever planned to harm. That he ever intended to harm. So, when we talk about the evidence of the affair, when we talk about evidence of financial concerns, when we talk about evidence of being ready to go to prison, those are the motives that the Commonwealth needs to prove to you to support any notion that a loving husband and a loving father would kill his wife. And the evidence suggests there was no motive at all. And without a motive, without a reason that is based on facts and circumstances, logic and understanding, without that, you have a sudden and unexpected event that results in confusion, and panic, and fear. All of those things that are so troubling and horrific that you've heard evidence about, they may be argued that they show consciousness of guilt. But people do things, terrible things sometimes, not out of guilt, but out of fear, out of disbelief, out of confusion. Certainly, a loving father and a loving husband would feel guilty about what he did do. Not just about lying to the police, but what he did do in the context of what he did to the woman he loved. In a moment, in hours, and in days of confusion and disbelief and horror. But that feeling of guilt had nothing to do with the killing, because he never killed Anna Walshe. You will hear arguments that you've seen the evidence that might evoke emotion. Who wouldn't feel emotional in what you've heard, what you've seen? But your obligation, and I don't mean to sound like I'm lecturing you at all. Her Honor will instruct you on the law, and that is not my province, but you cannot base your verdict on sympathy for Anna Walshe. You can't base your verdict on anger for what Mr. Walshe did. You can't base your verdict on passion, based on the evidence that you've heard that is upsetting and terrifying and at times disgusting. But that's not what you can do as jurors in this case. At the beginning of this case, when you were sworn as jurors, you might not recall it, but the clerk of this court read you some words. To this indictment, the defendant pleads not guilty. Places himself before this country which you are, the obligation that you have accepted in this case is unlike perhaps any obligation that you've ever accepted in your life. Perhaps. That's for you to judge. But your obligation requires that without passion and without anger and without sympathy, that you assess the facts as troubling as they are, and at times as horrific as they are, and make your verdict rest on the evidence, and nothing less and nothing more. Unbelievable, facts that don't make sense at times, something that is incongruent. An example of that is the end of Mr. Jim Mutlow's testimony, where for almost an hour, he talked beautifully about the love between these two people. Then he talked glowingly about Mr. Walshe. And then toward the end of his examination, he wanted to say something about now he was thinking there might have been some kind of problem. And reflect upon the evidence that he gave of a phone call he had with Mr. Walshe on the 4th, when the conversation was confusing to Mr. Mutlow, confusing where he kept asking what could have happened that would result in Anna Walshe leaving the lie that Mr. Walshe was telling people out of fear that no one was going to believe him about what happened, so he lied. But consider the way that Mr. Mutlow had a terrible time trying to understand that. And why? Because he knew both of them. Because what he was thinking, why would Anna Walshe leave? They love each other. I know them both. It makes no sense. And that is what happens when something happens that is totally confusing. You just can't believe it. And you seek answers. You yearn for answers that make sense of something. And when something sudden and unexpected happens, something tragic, your ability to come to terms with it, when it's such a dynamic, such a tragedy, you change. You change. The evidence of the searches. The dark, troubling evidence of the searches. They began at 4:52 a.m. on January 1st of 2023. The first one is, how do you dispose of a body? It causes chills. It causes disgust. Look at all of those searches. Think of how they evolved. Consider how they go from one subject to another in rapid fashion. Searches conducted by a man that is in disbelief, in confusion. 5 hours spending with his wife on New Year's Eve, enjoying life, talking about the future. And then the sudden and unexpected tragedy happens, and it doesn't make sense. If Mr. Walshe began to make those searches with murder in his heart as a result of murder, then why isn't the first search how to dispose of a body after murder? Because that's the search that occurred 6 hours later. And when you see that word murder, no one would not react to that word. And certainly as jurors in this matter, you're expected to react in a way to that. What does that mean? Does that mean that he in fact murdered his wife? But think about it in context. In this case, on these facts, context matters. And so the first time the word murder is used in these horrific searches is 6 hours after they began. And I tried to ask Trooper Garino, one of the forensic specialists, as he called himself, associated with the Mass State Police. I tried to ask him, well, it's only logical, isn't it, that if you don't get results, you change the wording. We all know that from our own common experience. And you look at those searches that came and went during this time, and the results had to do with funeral parlors and cemeteries and things like that. But Mr. Walshe, given the tragedy that occurred to his wife, and given the time that had passed and his fear and disbelief, he couldn't call a funeral parlor. We need to try to understand, what can I do? Then the searches become darker. They become more upsetting. Now the thought is dismemberment. And there's searches like that. You've heard about them. You'll read about them. And then you see searches that cover days. And there's searches about cleaning. And there's searches about how to clean up. You'll read them. And even though they don't talk about murder, they are equally upsetting, because you're thinking, as jurors in this case, he's thinking about cleaning up the basement. He's thinking about how you clean a concrete floor. Context. 1,034 pages of digital data, 3,667 records taken from his MacBook. Not one record, not one page refers to any plan. Not one record, not one page refers to any intent to kill. Nothing. So keep it in context when you review. I suggest to you respectfully, you're the jurors. What is the evidence of premeditation? There's evidence of a knife. There's evidence of a knife that is seen in a kitchen cabinet. Did I please have exhibit 201? And next, exhibit 202. And finally, exhibit 203. The knife. It was above a refrigerator. It was in plain view. Had no visual red blood stain. And yet the government wants you to think about this knife. So think about it. Don't ignore it. Do not refuse to consider it. Of course you will, but think about it. In a cabinet above a refrigerator. And they first test it with some screening test. It doesn't prove that it has even blood on it. And they take it, and they should. And then, what happens is everybody loses interest with the knife. Everybody, the Mass State Police, the crime lab. There's no further testing of this knife. And ask yourself, if that knife is to be considered a weapon used, then why is it in that cabinet? You have heard evidence of bags and bags being thrown in dumpsters over a period of days. The government wants you to think that Mr. Walshe killed his wife and perhaps used this knife. Then why was it sitting in a cabinet days later in open view for the police? What logic is that? And there is no proof that it had one piece of biological evidence on it tied to any killing or any harm. And simply lost interest in it. You can take it down now. Digital data, talked about that briefly, but there is nothing in that data. All of it. And we're talking about text messages. We're talking about that this day and age we know apparently keep track of everything we do and to some extent everything we think about. Because that's how the government is using that data. They ask you to look at certain things and indicate and try to argue that, oh, this is what he was thinking. So look at it and judge for yourself. What's in this data that demonstrates premeditation or intent to kill or intent to harm? You have heard and seen much physical evidence. You've seen pictures of gray slippers with blood on them. You've seen pictures of all kinds of physical evidence. And if the argument is made by the government, something about a dark gray slipper with blood on it indicates that a murder happened because, listen to the argument, of course you will. But a theory, an opinion, does not make it true. And to suggest something like, the evidence shows that Mr. Walsh went and bought a Tyvek suit, and maybe there's just not enough blood on the Tyvek suit to satisfy the Commonwealth, and so they suggest that some killing happened, and that's why there's so much blood on that slipper and those slippers and all that other evidence. But ask yourself, what do I know about that evidence now from what we heard? Every piece of evidence was put into a bag, but then was put into a compactor eventually and was put together and then found. And you will see all of this evidence of when they pulled it out of dumpsters and unloaded the bags, and they first put it on damp ground without any paper below it, without any tarp below it. And you heard from no less than 3 witnesses. Mr. Gould from the Mass State Police Crime Lab, Mr. Sheehan from the Mass State Police Crime Lab, and Ms. Celine from the DNA unit. They all consistently said cross-contamination or transfer. They used different terms, but they all agreed. So the evidence, the physical aspect of the evidence, the thing you see in the photographs, the thing you see now, if you open up one of the bags and take things out, is not representative, or may not be representative, of how it looked before. And you must consider that. So when the government makes an argument based on the state of the physical evidence as it appears now, ask yourself, maybe that makes sense, but maybe there's another way of thinking about it. And why is that important to your deliberations? Because you are allowed to rely on what's called circumstantial evidence. You're allowed to rely on inferences. And Her Honor will instruct you on that. I will not. But whatever reason and basis you have for making your choice and determining your decision must be reasonable. And if you, as jurors, talking amongst yourselves, find that some of your fellow jurors say, well, I think maybe it means this, and I believe this, and your other jurors, fellow jurors, say, I think this, and I believe this, you'll all consider it. But if you don't agree, then you have to ask yourself, is that inference reasonable? Is that circumstantial evidence built upon inference? Is that reasonable? And can I use that? And should I use that to try to reach a verdict under a standard of reasonable doubt to a moral certainty? What is the evidence that something violent happened in this house? I went through every room as best I could with Mr. Sheehan. There was nothing found in the upstairs bedroom. There was nothing found in the sinks and basins, showers, of multiple bathrooms. Nothing found, meaning biological evidence that might indicate something violent occurred. There was nothing found in the kitchen other than a knife that they lost interest in. There was nothing found in the living room that had padding around the fireplace to protect the children from falling. There was nothing in that bedroom where Anna Walshe, Brian Walshe, as adults, enjoyed their life together and had spent their life together, perhaps every night, before she moved to DC to take that job. How do we know that? We know that because the photographs show there was nothing there. Even what was characterized as red-brown stains on curtains in the bedroom turned out not to be blood at all. We know that because trained examiners for the Mass State Police examined probably every square inch of that house. We know that because we saw photographs and heard testimony about floor that was dug up based on their experience and training. That biological evidence, like blood, can fall between the cracks of flooring and reside on the subfloor. And so they tore the floor up, and you saw those photographs, and you'll have them. And nothing was found. Nothing at all. I asked Mr. Sheehan about blood spatter, and he forthrightly and honestly said, I'm not a blood spatter expert, but he explained it sufficiently to you. Someone wielding a knife for a weapon and causes blood to let out of a body, and you look for blood that has spattered with directionality. Nothing. Nothing in the bedroom, nothing in the living room, nothing in the bathrooms. No evidence that blood drained down the drains. Could I have exhibit 217, please? That test that I asked Mr. Sheehan about, the Serotek Hem test, that checks for hemoglobin, for blood, that test, he agreed, can detect blood at the sensitivity of 20 nanograms per milliliter. 20 nanograms. A nanogram, as he agreed, 1/1000th of a gram. Think of how minuscule that is. And they used that all over the house. And so the government elicited questions and answers from many of their state police, the 10 or 20. They didn't call everybody. That's up to them. But apparently there was no need to, because 10 people or more, as Mr. Sheehan had described to you, he was estimating. He was trying to be as honest as he could and credible, and he was. 10 people pouring over that house all day on January 8th. 10 more people or more pouring over that house on January 9th with their tools and their experience, and they don't find anything except multiple bloodstains where? In the basement. In the basement. On the concrete floor. Ask yourself, when you heard testimony that Mr. Walsh attempted to clean, and so therefore they couldn't find evidence in the other parts of the house because he cleaned it, well, ask yourself, wait a minute. Is that logical to suggest that he cleaned the bedroom up so well nobody could find a thing? He cleaned the living room up where the rug may have been, and they couldn't find anything. Well, then you see those searches where he searches specifically for how to clean concrete. So you might infer, and it might be a reasonable inference, that he attempted to clean that concrete floor. And yet, what was found on the concrete floor? Multiple red stains about to be blood, and in some instances, we can all agree, based on the testimony of Ms. Celine, the profile of those blood drops matched the profile of Anna Walsh. So to suggest that Mr. Walsh did everything he could to clean the basement concrete floor with hydrogen peroxide and mops and cleaning fluids, only to have blood found on the floor, defies a reasonable inference that he was able to clean any part of that house sufficiently to avoid detection. And why is that important? Because nothing violent happened in that house, and that's why there is no biological or blood evidence anywhere in that house. The act of trying to hide the body of his wife and the blood evidence that is seen on that carpet. That's what happened. There's no blood in the living room. The inference might be that the carpet was taken downstairs. Because you can look at those pictures. You can look at the physical pieces of carpet. You should. If there is no evidence of any killing that happened, and there's no evidence that anything was done before Mrs. Walsh died, and there's no evidence of premeditation or anything, there is evidence of lying and disposing of the body. You can take that one. So now we look at the evidence, and I'm just going to characterize it. Some of the evidence that the Commonwealth has presented to you, and there is no question that their obligation is to present to you evidence. But I just ask you to think about, in some cases, how that evidence was presented to you. And I'm going to use a phrase that may or may not be entirely accurate, but it's cherry picking. It's looking at thousands of points of data and asking you to think about it, but not telling you why you should think about it. And what am I talking about specifically? And I'll give you some examples. We already talked about the hole. I kept talking to you about that hole in the room as if it was of some significance. And yet you recall the testimony of Mr. Sheehan. I didn't see anything significant about it. It looked like somebody might have fallen through the ceiling. And there's nothing significant about the pieces that Mr. Walsh had stored in the cabinet in that same bedroom. I asked Mr. Sheehan about that. I didn't see anything significant about that. Yet you kept being given that evidence. And then as the evidence developed, for some reason, there's Mr. Murphy. And it came out in evidence that Mr. Murphy had in fact contacted Mr. Walsh because there was a promotion going on. It wasn't that Mr. Walsh said, hey, come and fix this hole, this suspicious hole. No, he was contacted. And he didn't respond right away, but then he did. And for some reason, they keep insisting that that hole is of some significance, but they don't tell you why. They just give it to you. They do the same thing with the searches. Remember when Trooper Keefe was sitting right here and he's asked to look through those thousands of, 250 pages of the search history from the iPhone Mini 13, the phone that belonged to Mr. Walsh, and he's asked to look at it and says, do you see searches there to go to the MGM? Yes, I do. Nothing else. No explanation why that is significant, why it's important to try to determine if a man committed premeditated murder. You're just throwing out pieces of evidence. Why? Why were you given, why was Trooper Keefe asked to tell you about a song, a partial song title? And when you go over that evidence, look through there if you choose to, and I will encourage you to do that. And you see song after song and movie title after movie title. Why is it that the government throws that at you and says, think about this? For what reason? And then they present to you through Trooper Garino something about a porn movie. I'll just take this opportunity right now to apologize to each and every one of you for some of the questions I asked. But it just didn't make sense that you would take that type of evidence and suggest that it has anything to do with determining whether someone committed deliberate, premeditated murder because there's a word in the title of a movie. And that's what I'm talking about, the quality of some of the evidence here, thrown at you as if it means something, that it's significant, and yet here you are being asked to determine if someone, Mr. Walsh, committed premeditated murder with a specific intent to kill the woman he loved. When we talk about premeditated murder, we talk about planning, you have to ask yourself, did I hear evidence of the conduct of a man who premeditated, a man that had thought about a killing, a man that had planned? I mean, think about what you heard. And we're not going to repeat all those things I've already said, but I want you to focus on one other piece of evidence. I asked Detective Schmidt, when you went down to the basement on January 4th, you saw some bags down in the basement. Yes, I did. What did you think was in those bags? I thought they were pieces of rug. My goodness. What does that tell you about the thinking process and the sloppiness and the lack of any planning or careful thought that you would expect out of someone who had planned a murder? And then he lets a police officer walk down in the basement, and the police officer, based on his training and experience, uses, I think he said, his boot, and he felt it, and he said, felt like pieces of rug to me. Rug that is in evidence. It has blood. Think about all of that when you're thinking about it. Did this man, Mr. Walsh, did he plan anything? No. Did he intend to kill anybody? No. Did he kill Anna Walsh? No. The evidence does not support a finding of premeditated murder with specific intent to kill based on the evidence, not based on sympathy, based on the evidence. What's some other evidence that is troubling? Mr. Walsh talking to the police, and he says, I messenger. When asked about, and we was trying to explain it, things will come up on my phone that I thought were for me, but then it turns out they were for Anna. And so the government seizes upon that evidence and suggests that there's evidence that Mr. Walsh had seen text messages between Anna Walsh and William Fastow. And those text messages between Anna Walsh and William Fastow, some text messages are placed into evidence, and I'm sure you'll look at them. And why would the government want you to believe that Mr. Walsh saw those text messages? Because some of the entries in those text messages are very upsetting. They may very well enrage a husband to read about what was going on in those text messages. So you'll look at them. But ask yourself, as you look at them, and perhaps as you think, I could see that might upset, that might put somebody in a rage. Problem is, there is absolutely no evidence that Mr. Walsh ever saw any text message, because he was trying to say, I messenger. And now you know from the testimony of Trooper Keith, there's no such thing as I messenger. We're talking about Facebook Messenger. But the important thing is, there is no evidence in all of the digital data that you have before you, in all the digital data that they examined, that Mr. Walsh ever saw anything going on between his wife and William Fastow. And when you look at those text messages, and you might have some question about it, and if the government stands up and says, well, he saw those because he told them that he was seeing iMessenger, which doesn't exist, then ask yourself, why is it that on New Year's Eve, Anna Walsh is taking all these photographs? It's festive. It's a lovely situation. And she says, in the presence of Brian Walsh, as she and Jim Mutlow were taking photographs, hey, why don't we send a photograph to Will Fastow? And was there any evidence that he reacted, Mr. Walsh? No. And when asked by Attorney Porges, well, so what happened next? And Mr. Mutlow really took efforts to remember, and then he said, oh yeah, that happened right before the young boy woke up and came downstairs, and that was around 10:30. So if you just think about that, then the festive and jovial celebration continued for another 2 hours. There is no evidence that he reacted. Mr. Walsh reacted to them sending a photo. Why? Because he knew his wife had a crush on Will Fastow, and it didn't even make him jealous. And how do we know that? Because she told her friend, Alyssa Kirby. And Alyssa Kirby was asked, and she said, Anna told me that he didn't get jealous. He's not the jealous type. In fact, I wish he was more jealous. Please consider that in the context of this notion that the motive for a killing that did not occur, but the Commonwealth's theory of a motive is anger over an affair. There's no evidence of that. Dr. Atkinson told you. Dr. Atkinson described to you the phenomenon of sudden unexpected death. It happens. And just because it's rare, and just because the government will undoubtedly argue that that is nonsense, listen to their argument. But Dr. Atkinson made it clear it happens. It happens in young and old, male and female. It happens unexpectedly. In fact, it happens with people who have never manifested any problem before. It happens in athletes. And how do we know that it's not absurd even though it might be rare. How do we know it is an important aspect of what happens to people? Because the laws of this state mandate that the office, the chief medical examiner, get information from doctors, police officers, nurses, when there is a sudden death, when someone is otherwise healthy. They're mandated to investigate that. So there is a statute that Dr. Atkinson told you a little bit about on cross-examination. So ask yourself, is it as unlikely? Is it bizarre? Because Anna Walshe worked out. Yes, she had been sick before. She had been with Alyssa Kirby in the days leading up to this, and Alyssa Kirby wound up having the flu. But that's not what really is at issue here. Sudden and unexpected death may occur because someone is ill. All we know is that it happens. And the fact that someone doesn't believe it could happen doesn't mean that it doesn't. Importantly, though, think about the shock of it happening. Think about the effect it would have on anyone. A lay person that has no idea it could happen. You're down celebrating with your wife and your friend, and then the tragedy happens. And you panic because you can't believe it. You don't understand it. And you don't think anybody's going to believe it. Context. I walked Trooper Keith through all of that information, something that he had not done yet. And so what did you hear? We went methodically. Sometimes, I'm sure for some of you, it was a little painful. It took a little while. But we went through hour by hour, day by day, that basically was the life and the experience that Anna Walshe and her husband, Brian Walshe, were going through in just the days leading up to January 1st of 2023. And what do you see? And you'll have that evidence. You won't have it compiled in the way that I presented it to you, because Trooper Keith never saw fit to assemble it in a way where you could really see what was going on. But what do you see, and what did you learn from the evidence? Two people communicating by phone and by text, talking about sales of property, talking about investments, talking about the future, talking about reinvesting, talking about buying new property in DC, talking about all of that, and it's all in the text. Joking when Anna Walshe was ill and stayed home and told her husband that in the text. And then they joke about it. I'll get you a plunger. And she responds, it's right there on the text. Joking back and forth in the days leading up to New Year's Eve. I'll tell you what, I'll buy the plunger. You buy me a Porsche. And then you see him shopping for a Porsche for the woman that he loved. How does it go from, I'm going to find you the Porsche you want, that speaks once again to the financial issues that were non-existent? How does it go from that to someone who is purportedly premeditating and intending to kill his wife? And those texts lead right up until she arrives by plane in Cohasset to celebrate. So, context. Once again, divorce. About 11 minutes of talking about divorce and searching about divorce in 7 days of phone calls. And how did that divorce search come up? It came up in the context of protecting the family assets because they just sold the house in Revere that Jim Mutlow told you about. And they're trying to protect it. And the thought is to roll it over in a 1053C. And Mr. Mutlow explained that to you. Planning for the future. That is the relationship between Brian Walshe and Anna Walshe in the days leading up to January 1st. So now we have come to just the evidence that, once again, just explains their relationship. Not supposition. Not trying to make up what they said to each other. You have that in their text. You have that. Then we get to New Year's Eve. We get to a festive event, jovial, laughter, love, described in various terms, various ways, not for 30 minutes, not for 1 hour, but for 5 or 6 hours. Laughter, talking about the future. Jim Mutlow described it for you. Brian Walsh cooking, standing across from the island, feeding both of them, talking, laughing. You see in the testimony that, yes, there was an affair. He didn't know it. He loved his wife. He treated his wife like the wife he loved, the mother of his children, until the sudden, unexpected event happened. Imagine you are so in love. You support your wife to get a job in D.C. You're going to take care of the kids because, one, you love your children, but you want to take care of them. You want to share property and protect the assets, so everything goes into her name to protect it, because he has this federal case. So let's protect our financials for the future. And then you hear the testimony of Alyssa Kirby. Yes, she was upset. There's no doubt Anna Walsh was upset. What exactly she was upset about? Maybe things weren't going really well in the affair she was having. Or maybe she was, in fact, stressed out. Who wouldn't be? They were living apart. She wasn't seeing her children. Now, maybe, it's up to her. Anna Walsh was a wonderful person and a wonderful mother. And that's why he loved her so much. But she had another life, and she went to Dublin, and that's another piece of evidence. They want to suggest to you he knows something about Dublin. Where is the evidence of that? None. And you hear Alyssa, her choked up with tears, sobbing on the stand, but nonetheless recalling a conversation she had on 12/29, 3 days before January 1st. What does Anna tell? Well, I don't know. I love him as much as I used to. Those are her words. I'm paraphrasing, but that was the gist of it. But I want him to take responsibility. Why? Not so she could kick him out, not so she could leave him, so they could reunite as a family. That was what Anna Walsh was talking about. That's what she was thinking, even though she was stressed, even though she was upset. And things like that happen in families, but families make it through. And that's what she was expressing. That's what she was expressing. Her best friend, Alyssa Kirby. Could I exhibit 169, please? We are now at the end of the New Year's Eve party, and they sign the champagne bottle. And we were talking about the feelings and the emotions and the state of mind of Anna Walsh and Brian Walsh. And looking towards the future. And this is on January 8th that the tragedy happened. Can you find it? I'm sorry, 169. Oh, I apologize. My fault. I'm sorry. Is it 257? And that's the champagne box that was signed. And what are the words? What a year. And yet we are still here. and together. Let's make 2020 the best one yet. We are the authors of our lives. Courage, love, perseverance, compassion. Those are the words of Anna Walshe talking to her husband. Look what she says here. They are still here. They had been through a lot. She missed her children. What mother wouldn't? But they were working toward the future. And one final thing about the state of mind of Brian Walshe at this period of time. He made reservations for a New Year's Day dinner so he could be alone with his wife. And the evidence of that is in these records. And I'm not going to have it called up. I'll just tell you. Exhibit 79, page 186, record 682. That's the data. He's researching where to take her out. A restaurant that I asked Trooper Keefe about. At 59, at 12:27, those records indicate that Mr. Walshe credit card used to reserve dinner for $573.76. So him and Anna could spend New Year's Day celebrating. And exhibit 170, a text from Nightshade Restaurant itself acknowledging the reservation. And those were the plans that he made. That's some kind of evidence of premeditation. Well, it's not in evidence but love. And I'll just tell you, when you look at evidence, you'll see that that email exchange was deleted. It's right there in the evidence. And then you heard the federal probation officer saying he wouldn't be allowed to go there. He'd have to get permission. So yes, Mr. Walshe lied to his probation officer for what reason? So he could take his wife out for a New Year's dinner, and that evidence, and the evidence that you saw in that champagne box, is what their life was right at the moment before the tragedy happened. That is the evidence. I'm sorry I talked for so long. I apologize. Mr. Walshe loved Anna Walshe, the mother of his 3 children. There's no evidence that he deliberately premeditated a murder. There's no evidence that he ever intended to kill Anna Walshe. None whatsoever. Mr. Walshe is not guilty. He's not guilty of murder. Thank you.
Jurors can't, why don't you take a moment to stand up? Everyone good? When you're ready, you may be seated. Now, we're hearing the closing argument of the Commonwealth. 88 yes. You may.
Thank you, Your Honor. Anna Walshe is dead. Anna Walshe is dead because he murdered her and he intended her death. Anna Walshe is not missing. She never walked out of her class at home on January 1st of 2023 between 6 and 7 a.m. to take an Uber to Logan Airport. She wasn't going to DC for a work emergency. There was no emergency. She didn't say goodbye to her son. That's just a story that the defendant told people. But since January 1st, Anna Walshe has not been seen by her friends, her coworkers, or by the people who loved her. Anna didn't take an Uber. She didn't take a Lyft. She hasn't used her phone. Her phone's had no contact with the Verizon network since January 2nd, 2023, but it was in the vicinity of 516 Chief Justice Cushing Highway. She hasn't used her bank accounts, her passports, her credit cards, her email. She didn't vanish. The defendant was the only adult at 516 Chief Justice Cushing Highway after Jim Lulu left around 1:30 a.m. on New Year's Day. After he left, Anna was home alone with the defendant and their 3 sons, ages 2, 4, and 6. This defendant caused Anna's death. And the evidence does show you that. The evidence shows Anna didn't die of natural causes, but that Anna died a violent death in her Cohasset home on January 1st. You have the photos of those pieces of rug recovered from the dumpster at the defendant's mother's complex. The rug that had been in the living room. You have the photo of Anna in the living room on top of the rug. The photo shows that there are wood floors in that room. There's blood on that rug. The rug was recovered from the compactor outside of the defendant's mother's apartment and taken to the office of the chief medical examiner for examination. And Dr. Atkinson found a blood clot and a piece of Anna's Gucci necklace embedded in one of the cut up pieces of rug. So look at the piece of metal stamped Gucci. It didn't break on its own. The rest of the necklace is missing. This is the necklace that Will Fastow said that Anna often wore. Look at the slippers from the dumpster. The 2 pairs of adult slippers. The dark gray slippers have hair and blood clumped to the bottom. And the DNA testing tells you that the slippers had the DNA of Anna Walshe and the DNA of the defendant. Then there's the bathrobe. And there are 2 bloody white towels. A towel was tested and had Anna's DNA. Why did the defendant throw those items out? Because they had Anna's blood on them. And the evidence shows you this, because the defendant was researching cleaning. How to clean blood from what floors? Does dishwasher clean blood? Is it possible to clean DNA off knives? The defendant still had a cut on his thumb on January 9th, 2023. And on January 1st, before he even went to Lowe's to buy any cutting instruments, an initial stop that he made when he left his house was to go to Walgreens to buy antibiotic ointment and Band-Aids. Then he went to Bin and Liquors, where the manager identified the defendant, and the defendant threw a bag into the dumpster. Doors closed, the parking lot is empty. He's not yet gone to Lowe's. On January 2nd of 2023, the defendant went to Home Goods because he had to buy a new rug for that living room to cover the hardwood floor. He did this days before the forensic scientists got to the house and knew that the rug had been changed. Anna Walshe dying a sudden death from natural causes defies common sense. She was in great shape. The defendant told police that Anna was a sturdy Serbian woman. Listen carefully to his recorded interviews, because those are his words after her death, after he killed her. Mark Salvaggi told you that Anna had the highest health rating of the life insurance company. Anna had to complete an interview, have blood drawn, provide her medical records, and the life insurance company and the underwriters gave her this health rating. Anna was an active person who took care of her health. Ashley Samino, her bar instructor, told you about this exercise class that she took the morning of December 31st of 2022. And Anna was the type of person, she said, who made others want to work harder in their exercise class. Will Pastel told you that was very active. They did yoga together. Sergeant Amy Waterman described Anna's home gym in DC. And Dr. Atkinson told you about the different ways a person can die, and that it's extremely rare for a 39-year-old in good health to suddenly die of unknown causes. But without a body, it's not possible for the medical examiner to tell you the exact cause of Anna Walshe's death. No autopsy can be done. The defendant deliberately got rid of Anna Walshe's body. The defendant did not want anyone to find Anna's body and to know how she died. So the defendant bought cutting tools at Lowe's and Home Depot, and he cut up Anna's body, the woman that he claimed to love, and he threw her into dumpsters. He was hiding her body. The defendant intended to kill Anna Walshe. He didn't just want her dead, he needed her dead. This was a marriage in crisis, and it was heading towards a breaking point. It began with the defendant's federal case. And through the defendant's interview and his federal probation officer, you learned that the defendant was on home confinement. He was going to have to pay over $400,000 in restitution, and the case had been pending since 2018. You also learned that the defendant had no assets. He told Jamulu that he only made $50,000 to $60,000 that year, but he had told the police that he had businesses that were not making any money at all yet. Peter Capozzoli told you that the defendant's mother had signed the lease for the Cohasset home, and it was his mother that was paying his rent. Meanwhile, Anna was beginning to thrive. The marriage was beginning to deteriorate. Anna had her dream job. She had risen to become an executive at Tishman Speyer, and she was making close to $300,000 a year. She earned a bonus. And Teresa Marchese said that Anna was a good employee and her bonus and salary. She bought a townhouse, and she furnished that townhouse for her family, and she set up bedrooms for each of her 3 boys. But the reality was, family couldn't join her because the defendant needed the children with him. Being the primary caregiver allowed him to avoid prison. The separation of the defendant and Anna was taking a toll. Anna wanted the children with her, and Anna began a relationship with Will Fastow, which became more serious. The defendant and Anna were growing apart emotionally and physically. Anna struggled not having her children and not being able to be the mother that she wanted to be. This got worse when Anna took the trip to Serbia to take care of her sick mother. Anna and Will Fastow spent the Thanksgiving holiday first in Dublin before Anna went to Serbia. And Anna bought her plane ticket with the credit card that the defendant monitored. And the defendant told police that he monitored their joint Chase Freedom credit card statement. The MacBook history also shows the defendant looking at the Chase account. The defendant knew about Anna's travel because in a recorded interview, he told the police that she had a layover in Frankfurt, and that connection in Frankfurt is on the same credit card statement. And you can see that, it's right in front of you. The defendant was angry about Anna missing Thanksgiving, and he mentioned it repeatedly when he spoke to investigators.
I got angry about Thanksgiving, and then I realized it was just sad that we're not spending a lot of time together. And she was sad about it too, and it was exhausting for both of us. She was away from the boys, I was always dealing with the boys.
Anna returned from Serbia in December, but she only spent one day in Cohasset. And she was supposed to come home for Christmas morning, but she missed her early flight, and she couldn't get a flight, and then she had to drive up. The defendant told police there was an argument.
I did have an argument with her for the Thanksgiving and the Christmas Eve, so I wasn't going to make the same mistake 3 times.
So what did the defendant do on Christmas Day when his wife wasn't home? He looked up Will Fastow on his cell phone, the man his wife had just spent the night with. The defendant was losing Anna. Anna was missing her children and wanted to keep them. Anna quickly returned to DC, and on December 27th, the defendant was looking up the best strategies to divorce for a man and the DC divorce laws. This was not to protect assets. That wasn't the search. The defendant told the police that everything was in Anna's name. The defendant had nothing about Anna and the kids. And on December 29th, Anna spoke with General Wu and told him that she was upset about the travel, upset being separated from the children, upset about the defendant's federal case. It was ongoing. It was getting to be too much. On December 29th, Anna went out with Alyssa Curtin, and she broke down. This strong Serbian woman who was supposed to be having a fun night out with a girlfriend, going to dance karaoke, instead broke down. Anna told Alyssa that she had told the defendant that he needed to take responsibility for the federal case, go to prison. She wanted the children with her in DC, and she and the defendant had not been intimate close to a year. In Anna's mind, the marriage was broken. Anna even questioned if she could just take the children because she had already established a separate household. She said that she was falling out of love with the defendant. And at home in Cohasset, what was the defendant doing? He was looking up the Mazda building and the FBI raid on the Crossing building. Looking up something that had happened in the spring of 2022 when Anna first started working for Tishman's Fire. Interestingly, this was when the defendant brought up something he brought up in his interviews when he lied about Anna having to leave early for a work emergency. This planning the work emergency. The defendant was going to lose Anna, and when he lost Anna, he would probably lose his freedom. Anna would have a house in DC and a nice job, and he would likely go to jail. So the defendant pretended. He lulled Anna into thinking that everything was okay. He joked with her about a Porsche. He didn't want her to realize that he was aware of the relationship with Will or her ability to leave him. He wasn't going to let Anna know that she wasn't safe. On December 31st of 2022, the defendant claimed that he could not find his phone. Why is that important? The mislaid phone allowed the defendant to be unavailable for 2 days. The mislaid phone allowed him to carry out his plan uninterrupted. And the mislaid phone allowed him to show the police when he eventually reports Anna as a missing person and not have the police question why he didn't contact Anna earlier. The evidence shows that the defendant was methodical. Just look at how he shopped at Lowe's with a list. He planned it with precision. So Jem Lulu came over for dinner on New Year's Eve, and the defendant told Jem that his phone was lost and it was free. Anna was texting throughout the night, including with Will Fastow. This is now the third holiday where Anna was concentrating on the other man in her life. When Jem left, Anna was alone. She was with the defendant, the man she was cheating on, the man she was telling to take responsibility for his actions, and the man who had her children. The defendant murdered Anna that morning in their Cohasset home. And this is what the internet history shows. His internet history, written words. He was looking at best way to dispose of a body. Better to throw away crime scene clothes or wash them. Crime scene. Can you be charged with murder without a body? Anna was dead. The defendant killed her, and he began researching how to get her money, how to inherit, how to get away with a crime. And he might have gotten away with it, but he didn't know that his MacBook was syncing with his son's iPad, the same Apple ID. His demeanor changed during the interview on January 8th when the police mentioned the searches on the iPad. Not because the iPad involved his children. He had already involved the children in his lives, but because he knew he was caught. We know he had already involved the 6-year-old when he had the 6-year-old say that he saw his mother when she left the house on the morning of January 1st. The son could not have seen Anna leave the house. The defendant had already killed her. Listen to the recorded interviews. During the January 5th interview, the defendant spoke about what his son supposedly had seen. And the defendant involved the 4-year-old by saying that the 4-year-old hid the defendant's iPhone 13 mini. So, the defendant's phone made a reservation at Nightshade Noodle Bar for New Year's Day. After the defendant told Anna that they were going to have a special party. This is ironic because the defendant was very clear with police on January 7th that he and Anna had no plans for New Year's Day, and the defendant also knew that he would be violating the terms of his federal probation by going to a restaurant on New Year's Day. But let's look closely at Exhibit 170 about the Nightshade Noodle reservation, which was on the defendant's iPhone Mini 13, which the defense just said was deleted. And if you look on page 2, on the bottom of one of the bubbles, you will see that the message was deleted on January 1st at 7:59 and 5 seconds a.m. This happens to be one of the times that the iPhone Mini 13 was unlocked when it was supposed to be missing. The forensics show that the defendant's phone was unlocked 4 times and it was plugged in on January 1st. You heard testimony that the phone had a password of 197512. And in the January 4th recorded interview, you hear the oldest child needed help with his iPad password, which was 121212. The children didn't unlock the defendant's phone. The defendant blamed his misplaced phone on one of his children when he said that the children hid it. But it makes no sense that a 4-year-old somehow unlocked the defendant's phone and deleted that text reminder. Listen to the defendant's recorded interview. The deletion is made when the defendant is supposedly making French toast and playing with the kids. The defendant had access to his phone. Context. The defendant also had access to 2 other phones when his phone was supposedly lost. He had Anna's phone and he had the iPhone SE. And in the recorded interviews, the defendant told police that on New Year's Eve, Anna had an argument with a friend, and as a result, Anna put her phone upstairs in his bedroom.
You said she went and put her phone upstairs after that?
After that, she, let's say it's 10 or 15, then she, I remember her putting her phone upstairs because then she came back down without it.
Was Thomas came down at one point and hung out with you?
Yes. Yeah, exactly.
Was this before, during, or after Thomas was participating as well?
Oh, yeah, Thomas went to bed at, he went to bed when he came over at like 9 or 10 or something. I think Anna took a bunch of photos. Jem and I don't have any because she didn't send them to us yet. But I think she sent one to Will Fasto. So that was when, that's when the photo was taken about. So just maybe 10 o'clock or something like that.
You know where upstairs she put her phone at that point?
Yeah, on her bedstand.
That's not what Jem said. Jem said that Anna was using her phone all night. Melissa Kirby texted with Anna. The defendant was telling investigators a story about Anna's phone. How else do we know that the defendant intended to kill Anna and had a plan for doing so? Look at his internet history. Look at what he did. The defendant set up an area in his basement where he surrounded it with plastic sheeting or a tie-back suit and dismembered his wife, the love of his life. Hacksaw, the best tool for dismembering a body. Then the defendant got rid of Anna's body. He got rid of her belongings. He got rid of her clothes and a bag that he told police that she had. but she supposedly left on January 1st. He threw her in the garbage bags, tossed those garbage bags in different dumpsters, disposing of a body in the trash. Chatham West apartment rental, the Claremont apartment rental. And police confirm this with the location data from the SE phone and the iPhone 13 mini. The evidence shows that the defendant did this to hide the fact that he murdered Anna. He could not let Anna's body be found because Anna didn't die of natural causes. The defendant murdered Anna, and then he had to hide the evidence of his crime. In his mindset, look at his internet history. Want to get away with murder? Use a special detergent. Can you be charged with murder without a body? Best way to dispose of body parts after murder. When you deliberate, look through the binder of the MacBook internet history. There are no searches of natural causes of death, sudden death, heart attack, aneurysm, stroke, or how to help your children when someone dies unexpectedly or goes missing. The defendant was not sad. Look at his demeanor in the surveillance videos. He's cool and calculating. He's calm. He had a plan. On January 1st, he went to the Lowe's store an hour away, even though there were hardware stores approximately a mile from his house. And when he was in Lowe's on January 1st, he wore a mask and he wore gloves and he had a list of what he was shopping for. He was calm as he helped bag the purchases. A hacksaw, buckets. He used cash. Does this show confusion, panic, or fear? But he doesn't stop there. He went to CVS to buy hydrogen peroxide. And then he went to Stop and Shop to buy ammonia. No wonder the house was so clean. And on Monday, January 2nd, he went to Home Goods for rugs and handles. And then he went to Home Depot, where he bought buckets with lids this time, baking soda, and a hatchet. And at some point that day, he got a call from his probation officer. And he lied, and he said that he was picking up his children. He was able to calmly speak with her. No panic. He had everything now that he needed to dismember the woman that he supposedly loved. And he started to take her body and to throw it into dumpsters, because he had to cover up the crime to get rid of the evidence of the murder. This was not a man in crisis. This was a man who on January 4th went to TJ Maxx to buy pants with the store exchange card. He was calm. But Alyssa Kirby texted him on January 4th asking about Anna. And so he called Tishman's Fire a few minutes later and started to pretend to look for her. He called Will Fastel, but he didn't leave a message. He called back later, and then he calmly left a voicemail. No panic. The defendant knew where Anna was. The defendant even texted Anna's sister in Canada and said that she was missing. He was methodical. Look at the text messages. And at 4:30 p.m. on January 4th, the defendant went to Lowe's to buy a trash can. Comfortable. Not panicked. The police were coming to the house soon to talk about Anna. And the defendant had the house ready. The police think his wife is in D.C. He had his phone ready, and he sent text messages to Anna, even though he knew she would never see him. Despite everything that he had done, on January 2nd, the defendant wrote a text message to Anna. I still love you. Ha ha. Ms. June. The defendant prevented anyone from ever finding Anna's body and no autopsy. Dr. Atkinson told you that the medical examiner can't do an autopsy without a body. And all that remains of Anna are a few hairs, some blood, and a few things that belong there. A part of a necklace she often wore, her hunter boots, a black jacket, a purse, her COVID card, and a few other items in the dumpster in his mother's apartment complex. The defendant searched his MacBook for a murder conviction without a body. Please do not allow the defendant's self-serving act of dismembering and disposing of Anna's body to let him get away with this murder. At the start of this trial, we asked you to use your common sense. When you do that, when you analyze the evidence as you deliberate and continue to use your common sense, you will see that the evidence shows there is only one verdict. Find the defendant is guilty of the premeditated first-degree murder of Anna Walshe. Thank you.
I will see counsel at the side of the bench. So George, you're my guidepost. Do you need a break for the bathroom? Okay. All for one, one for all. Give you a break for the bathroom. Let us know when you're ready to come back out. Be at your seat.
All right, please. Jurors, follow me.
Seated. I will give you a quick break as well, but something's been on my mind that I want to discuss now that the closing arguments are over. And that is, I had asked in connection, this relates to the sentencing, at least for the other two counts, and asked the Commonwealth to provide victim impact statements for any immediate family members of Anna Walshe that wish to provide information. And I haven't received that yet. And there might be a good reason for that. I had told you that I was putting off the sentencing until we had a verdict on the charge of murder. But now that it's a Friday and I don't want this to linger over into the next week, has the Commonwealth heard back from the Department of Children and Family Services?
Your Honor, we've been in touch with them. They are working on their impact statement. They were hoping to have the impact statement impounded And I can, as soon as we're done here with the charge, I will speak to the attorney that I've been dealing with. They've been working very hard on this. They're certainly worried about their privacy interests of the children and the
I think there's a
social work.
valid privacy interest of the children, and I'm highly likely to impound it, obviously, with the exception of counsel for both sides being able to see it so that they can make appropriate arguments as a result of the victim impact statement.
I think the department will be very happy to hear that. And they also, much of what they have is through a social worker privilege, so they're concerned about that as well. But as soon as we break, I will be happy to have that conversation.
Well, I'm happy to hear that there's forward progress because I guess I assumed, because I hadn't heard anything, that you were still not getting the answers to the questions you were asking.
No, quite the opposite. They've been working very hard on this.
All right, I appreciate that.
Thank you.
Anything anyone needs before I step off the bench briefly? Thank you.
All rise.